Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, dark opening in the earth, a place where sunlight has never reached, where the air itself feels ancient, and where every step downward is a journey not just through space, but through time. Beneath our feet lies a hidden world, one that remains largely untouched and unknown. While we often look to the stars for discovery, some of the most extraordinary secrets are buried deep within our own planet. For centuries, caves have fascinated explorers and scientists alike, offering glimpses into geological processes, ancient climates, and even early human history. But there are caves, and then there are the deepest caves on Earth. These are not simple underground chambers. They are immense vertical labyrinths, plunging thousands of meters into the crust. Places where temperatures shift unpredictably, where oxygen levels fluctuate, and where the pressure of the Earth above creates conditions unlike anything found on the surface. One such place, known as the deepest cave ever explored, descends over 2 kilometers beneath the surface. To enter it is to step into a realm that challenges both the limits of human endurance and our understanding of life itself. At first glance, caves may seem lifeless. Cut off from sunlight, devoid of plants, and seemingly isolated from the ecosystems above, they appear to be barren voids. But scientists began to realize something remarkable. Life, in its most resilient forms, does not need sunlight to exist. This realization transformed caves from geological curiosities into biological frontiers. To understand why, we need to step back and consider one of the most fundamental processes on Earth: energy. On the surface, nearly all life depends on the sun. Through photosynthesis, plants convert sunlight into chemical energy, forming the base of the food chain. But deep underground, sunlight cannot penetrate. And yet, life persists. So where does the energy come from? The answer lies in chemistry. In the depths of the Earth, certain microorganisms have evolved the ability to harness energy not from light, but from chemical reactions. These organisms, known as chemolithotrophs, feed on minerals such as sulfur, iron, and methane. Instead of relying on sunlight, they derive energy from the Earth itself. This process, called chemosynthesis, is not just a curiosity, it may represent one of the earliest forms of life on our planet. And it is within the deepest caves that scientists have found some of the most extreme examples of this phenomenon. As explorers descended further into these underground systems, they began to encounter environments that seemed almost alien. Pools of water saturated with minerals, air filled with unusual gases, rock formations shaped not just by erosion, but by microbial activity. The deeper they went, the more the cave transformed. Temperature gradients shifted, sometimes becoming warmer as geothermal heat rose from below. Oxygen levels dropped, creating hypoxic conditions that would be dangerous, even deadly, for untrained explorers. And yet, within these harsh environments, life was not only surviving, it was thriving. What they discovered next was even more surprising. In some of the deepest chambers, scientists found microbial ecosystems that had been completely isolated from the surface for millions of years. These organisms had evolved independently, adapting to conditions that would be considered extreme even by underground standards. Some bacteria were found to metabolize metals directly from a surrounding rock. Others formed biofilms, thin, slimy layers that coated cave walls and floors, creating entire microecosystems sustained by chemical energy alone. But perhaps the most astonishing discovery was not just the presence of life, but its diversity. Despite the harshness of the environment, these caves hosted a surprising range of microorganisms, many of which were entirely new to science. Each new sample brought with it the possibility of discovering species that had never been seen before, organisms that could reshape our understanding of biology. And this raised an even deeper question. If life can exist in such extreme, isolated environments here on Earth, where else might it be found? The implications extended far beyond the cave itself. Scientists began to draw parallels between these underground ecosystems and environments on other planets and moons. Places like Mars, with its subsurface ice, or Europa, with its hidden ocean beneath a frozen crust, suddenly seemed more hospitable than previously imagined. The cave was no longer just a cave. It had become a window into the possibility of life beyond Earth. But as researchers continued their descent, collecting samples and mapping the cave's vast network, they began to encounter something even more unusual, something that challenged not just our understanding of life, but of the Earth itself. Because hidden deep within the darkness were signs that the cave was not as isolated as it once seemed. And what they discovered next would change everything. And what they discovered next would change everything. As scientists pushed deeper into the cave's shadowy corridors, their instruments began to detect subtle but unmistakable anomalies. Variations in temperature, unexpected chemical signatures, and faint movements of air that hinted at something far more dynamic than a sealed, static environment. At these depths, isolation was expected. The cave should have been cut off from the surface, its ecosystems evolving in complete separation. But the data told a different story. There were connections. Tiny fissures in the rock, invisible to the naked eye, formed intricate networks that linked the cave to deeper geological systems. Through these microscopic pathways, gases and fluids moved slowly, driven by pressure differences and geothermal forces. It was as if the cave was breathing. Scientists began to realize that these deep environments were not isolated pockets, but part of a much larger system, a hidden biosphere extending far beneath the Earth's surface. This concept, known as the deep biosphere, had been theorized for decades. But here, within the depths of the cave, it was being observed directly. The deeper researchers looked, the more complex the picture became. Water samples revealed the presence of dissolved gases such as hydrogen sulfide and methane, both of which can serve as energy sources for microbial life. These chemicals were not random. They were being produced through geological processes, such as the interaction of water with certain types of rock under high pressure and temperature. This meant that the cave's ecosystem was being sustained not by the surface, but by the Earth's internal chemistry. In essence, the planet itself was acting as a life support system. But perhaps even more intriguing was the discovery of microbial communities that appeared to be interacting with their environment in unexpected ways. Some bacteria were found to accelerate the breakdown of minerals, effectively reshaping the cave's structure over time. Others seemed to influence the formation of stalactites and stalagmites, altering the deposition of minerals in ways that could only be explained by biological activity. The cave was not just a passive environment. It was alive, in a geological sense. This realization blurred the line between biology and geology, suggesting that life and the Earth's physical processes are far more interconnected than previously thought. And then came one of the most puzzling findings. Deep within a submerged chamber, scientists discovered a pool of water unlike any they had seen before. It was dense, rich in dissolved minerals, and completely stratified, its layers unmixed, each with its own distinct chemical composition. Within this pool, microbial life existed in separate layers, each adapted to the specific conditions of its environment. Some thrived in oxygen-poor zones, while others occupied regions rich in sulfur or methane. It was a vertical ecosystem, stacked within a single body of water. What they discovered next was even more surprising. Genetic analysis of these microorganisms revealed that many of them were not just new species, they belonged to entirely new branches of the tree of life. Their DNA sequences were so different from known organisms that they challenged existing classification systems. This suggested that life in the deep biosphere had followed evolutionary paths that were completely independent from surface life. In other words, there were forms of life on Earth that had evolved in isolation for millions, perhaps even billions, of years. And this raised profound questions. How did these organisms originate? Were they descendants of ancient surface life that migrated underground, or did they emerge independently, evolving from chemical processes in the Earth's crust? Scientists began to consider the possibility that life may have multiple origins, even on a single planet. As research continued, the cave revealed yet another layer of complexity. Traces of organic molecules, some of them remarkably complex, were detected in areas where no direct biological source could be identified. These molecules appeared to form through purely chemical reactions, driven by heat, pressure, and the presence of certain. This process, known as abiotic synthesis, suggested that the building blocks of life could form spontaneously under the right conditions. And if that was true, then the boundary between non-living chemistry and living biology became even more blurred. The cave was no longer just a place where life existed. It was a place where life could begin. But as scientists pieced together these discoveries, a new question began to emerge, one that would take the implications of their findings far beyond the depths of the Earth. Because if the planet's interior could support such complex and diverse ecosystems, then how much of Earth's life was actually hidden from view? And what they would uncover next would force scientists to rethink the very definition of life on Earth. And what they would uncover next would force scientists to rethink the very definition of life on Earth. For centuries, humanity has understood life as something that flourishes on the surface, a thin, fragile layer wrapped around the planet, dependent on sunlight, atmosphere, and a delicate balance of environmental conditions. But deep beneath that surface, in places untouched by light and seemingly cut off from the world above, a different reality was beginning to emerge. The discoveries inside Earth's deepest cave were not isolated anomalies. Instead, they pointed toward a vast, hidden biosphere, one that could extend kilometers beneath continents and oceans alike. Scientists began to estimate its scale, and the numbers were staggering. Some studies suggested that a significant portion of Earth's microbial life, perhaps even the majority, exists underground. Locked within rock pores, deep aquifers, and subterranean networks, these organisms form a global ecosystem that operates entirely out of sight. The deeper researchers looked, the more they realized that the surface world we inhabit might represent only a fraction of life on this planet. But something else stood out. Life in the deep biosphere operates on a completely different timescale. On the surface, ecosystems are dynamic and fast-moving. Plants grow, animals move, seasons change. But deep underground, energy is scarce, and processes unfold at an almost unimaginable pace. Some microorganisms divide only once every hundreds, or even thousands, of years. They exist in a state that is neither fully active nor entirely dormant, sustaining themselves with minimal energy, surviving in conditions that would be lethal to most known life forms. It is a kind of biological endurance that challenges our assumptions about what it means to be alive. Imagine an organism that lives for millennia, barely changing, existing in near total stillness, yet still technically alive. This discovery has profound implications, not just for biology, but for our understanding of time, evolution, and survival itself. Because in these extreme environments, evolution does not stop. It simply slows down. Genetic mutations still occur, natural selection still operates, but over timescales that stretch far beyond human comprehension. Entire evolutionary pathways may unfold in silence, hidden deep within the Earth, unnoticed for millions of years. And then there is the question of resilience. If life can survive in such extreme, energy-limited conditions, then its potential range is far broader than previously imagined. This has transformed the way scientists search for life beyond Earth. Planets and moons that were once considered inhospitable, too cold, too dark, too isolated, are now being re-evaluated. Because if life does not require sunlight, if it can sustain itself through chemical energy alone, then the possibilities expand dramatically. Mars, with its subsurface ice and evidence of past activity, becomes a candidate. Europa, with its hidden ocean beneath a thick layer of ice, becomes even more compelling. Even distant worlds, once dismissed as lifeless, may harbor hidden ecosystems beneath their surfaces. The cave, in this sense, is more than a discovery. It is a model, a glimpse into how life might exist elsewhere in the universe. But the implications do not stop there. Back on Earth, these findings are reshaping our understanding of the planet itself. The deep biosphere may play a role in global processes that we are only beginning to understand. It could influence the carbon cycle, affect the composition of the atmosphere, and even impact geological activity over long timescales. In ways we cannot yet fully measure, life deep underground may be quietly shaping the world above. And yet, despite all that has been discovered, the deepest cave remains largely unexplored. Its passages continue downward, beyond the reach of current technology, into regions where conditions become even more extreme. Higher pressures, lower oxygen levels, greater gradients. What lies beyond remains unknown. But if the discoveries so far are any indication, the depths may hold even more extraordinary secrets. Perhaps entirely new forms of life. Perhaps clues to how life first began on Earth. Or perhaps answers to questions we have not yet thought to ask. Imagine descending further still, into a darkness so complete that even the concept of light feels distant. A place where the Earth's internal forces shape every aspect of the environment, and where life persists against all odds. It is here, in these hidden depths, that the boundaries of science are pushed to their limits. Because the deeper we go, the more we are forced to confront a simple but profound realization. Life is not confined to the conditions we once believed were necessary. It adapts. It persists. It finds a way. And in doing so, it reveals something fundamental, not just about the Earth, but about the nature of life itself. The cave, silent and unseen, continues to exist beneath our feet. A vast, hidden world, waiting to be explored, waiting to be understood, and perhaps waiting to change everything we thought we knew about life on Earth. And what they discovered next would change everything. As scientists pushed deeper into the cave's shadowy corridors, their instruments began to detect subtle but unmistakable anomalies. Variations in temperature, unexpected chemical signatures, and faint movements of air that hinted at something far more dynamic than a sealed, static environment. At these depths, isolation was expected. The cave should have been cut off from the surface, its ecosystems evolving in complete separation. But the data told a different story. There were connections. Tiny fractures in the surrounding rock, some no wider than a human hair, formed an intricate network stretching far beyond the visible cave system. Through these narrow pathways, gases and mineral-rich fluids moved slowly, driven by pressure differences deep within the Earth. It was as if the cave was breathing, not in the way living organisms do, but through a slow, geological rhythm dictated by the planet itself. Scientists began to realize that what they were observing was not an isolated environment, but part of something much larger, a vast, interconnected system hidden beneath the Earth's surface. This was the deep biosphere. For decades, it had existed mostly as a theory, a possibility that life might extend far below the surface, thriving in extreme conditions. But here, inside one of the deepest caves ever explored, that theory was becoming reality. The deeper researchers looked, the more complex this hidden world appeared. Water samples revealed dissolved gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide, substances toxic to most surface life, yet rich sources of energy for specialized microbes. These chemicals were not random. They were produced through interactions between water and rock under immense pressure and heat. This meant the cave's ecosystem was not dependent on the surface at all. Instead, it was powered by the Earth's internal chemistry. In essence, the planet itself was sustaining life from within. But perhaps even more fascinating was how life in this environment interacted with the cave around it. Scientists began noticing that certain rock formations, once believed to be shaped purely by geological processes, bore the unmistakable fingerprints of biological activity. Microbial colonies were actively altering their surroundings, accelerating chemical reactions that dissolved minerals in some areas and deposited them in others. Stalactites and stalagmites, those iconic formations that grow slowly over thousands of years, were in some cases being shaped not just by dripping water, but by living organisms. The cave was not just a passive structure. It was being reshaped, continuously, by life itself. The deeper researchers ventured, the more they encountered environments that seemed almost alien in their complexity. In one remote chamber, they discovered a pool unlike anything seen before. The water was dense, saturated with minerals, and eerily still. But what made it truly remarkable was its layering. The pool was stratified. Each layer had a distinct chemical composition, and these layers did not mix. Oxygen levels varied dramatically between them. Some were rich in sulfur compounds, others in methane, and some contained almost no oxygen at all. And within each layer, life had adapted perfectly. Microbial communities existed in vertical isolation, each thriving within its own narrow band of conditions. Some organisms depended on sulfur oxidation. Others consumed methane. Still others survived in near-complete darkness with barely any available energy. It was a stacked ecosystem, compressed into a single body of water. What they discovered next was even more surprising. When scientists began analyzing the DNA of these microorganisms, they found sequences unlike anything recorded before. Many of these microbes did not fit neatly into known biological categories. In fact, some were so genetically distinct that they appeared to represent entirely new branches on the tree of life. This was not just biodiversity. It was biological discovery on a fundamental level. These organisms had likely evolved in isolation for millions of years, possibly far longer, cut off from surface ecosystems and following evolutionary paths that had never been observed before. And this raised a profound question. Were these life forms descendants of ancient surface organisms that had migrated underground, or had they originated independently, emerging directly from the chemical conditions of the Earth's interior? Scientists began to consider a possibility that once seemed almost unthinkable: that life might not have a single origin, that under the right conditions it could arise more than once, even on the same planet.